Howdy Beans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Howdy Beans podcast. I'm your host, Luke the Elder Bean. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good. As per usual, today we're going to be kicking off not only a brand new series, but also we're going to be talking about one of my most favourite superhero movies, an absolutely legendary movie. It was the movie that started it all. It was the film that really launched superheroes into sort of the zeitgeist, into the movie sort of genre. And it's the movie that told Marvel, this can be done. This can be profitable. And from there, we got X-Men, and we got Fantastic Four, and we got Spider-Man. Eventually, we got Iron Man, and we got The Punisher, and we got so many like movies that came after this one. So I'm just so excited. So today we're going to be talking about the 1998 movie Blade, which is as old as I am now. This movie is 28 years old, or it will be sometime this year, which is crazy to think. But yeah, me and Blade are the same age. But before I get into all of that and more, I want to do a bit of housekeeping because I've got to keep my house nice and clean, especially if the daywalker's coming around. I've got to make sure, I've left no silver and garlic, and there's no mirrors around. And basically, no, scratch that. I need all those things because I ain't the one I got worried about Blade. I've got to worry about vampires coming. So maybe I need all the garlic and steaks I can find. But to invest in that, to make sure that I've got all that, special equipment and that I'm protected and safe, you have to do some things for me quickly, which is make sure that you follow me on Twitter at howdybeans_pod. If you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you listen to this on Spotify, again, make sure you leave me a follow if you're not already, and rate the podcast 5 stars. Also, you can find the Howdy Beans podcast on TikTok and on Instagram. Just type in the Howdy Beans podcast and you'll find me there. So as I mentioned, this is the beginning of a new series, kind of like last week's episode was, where it was the beginning of a brand new series of like movies that I've only seen the trailer to. It's the same sort of thing here, but the difference is with this series that I'm calling it superhero movies I grew up with. So these are going to be the movies that I grew up watching, that the ones that influenced me. They are the reason why I'm such a big fan of movies, superhero movies specifically, and why I love them, and why I keep going back and watching them, no matter who makes them, whether it be DC or be Marvel. Why I keep coming back, specifically Marvel, because again, Marvel for me was in the zeitgeist the most. They were like in my provisional vision growing up, because like I said, you had Punisher, you had Spider-Man, you had Fantastic Four, you had the Hulk. I am a huge fan of the Hulk, and Ang Lee's version of the Hulk is an absolute masterpiece of a movie, and I can't wait to get around to it to talk to it, because that movie is way deeper than anybody really knows, and the way it deals with trauma and the way it uses the Hulk to kind of show that trauma is like, oh my god, we'll get there when we get there. But this is a series that I've wanted to do since, again, the first year of the podcast. It is one that I want to look at, and I figured now that Avengers DoomsDay is coming out soon, and eventually we're going to have all of sort of the characters from all the different universes coming back in, and obviously Blade's made a return in the last sort of Deadpool movie. And again, whatever happens with Doomsday, that's going to lead to Secret World, I think it's called, or Battle World even, where like Doctor Doom, in the comics this is anyway. I doubt they're going to do this in the movie. They might do, but in the comic books, Doctor Doom basically gets all of the multiverses, all the different Earths, crashes them together and wakes one super world, which is Battle Earth, where all the different heroes and villains from all the different multiverses all come together to battle it out, to see who is the best, who's the strongest. And it's a quite interesting concept and story. But I figured with that coming soon, it would be a good time to look at the movies that I grew up with and the movies that mean a lot to me, as we are today with Blade. Now, while I will admit, like I said, Blade came out in 1998. I was born in 98, so I didn't watch this movie when it first come out. Let's be honest with ourselves. I'm not that good of, I'm not much of a movie connoisseur that I was able to watch this movie at 2 months old. But it's still a movie that I remember vividly, and it's still a film that stuck with me, and it stuck with a lot of people. And it's not just for sort of that one scene at the beginning of the movie where you've got the incredible music playing and you got the blood rain. It's not like that's epic as well, but it's not just that. It's other things as well about this film, and I am excited to finally talk about Blade because, like I said, I've got many memories of it. Like that was a movie that I found a lot later on. Was again in the year 2000 we had X-Men that made sort of the X-Men, especially the first one, and then X-Men 2 as well, X2. They're both brilliant, but X-Men was like, this is showing what we can do with like loads of heroes, loads of different characters, not just one singular character. And then, you know, being able to then translate to then Spider-Man and bring in the Green Goblin, which was, oh my God. And then, you know, with all the other movies, so like it was one that I didn't watch when it came out, but I went back to, and I could have, and I've that's a movie that I loved when I was younger because it was just cool with vampires, and I didn't really know it was a superhero movie, to be honest. It wasn't until I was older that I realised that Blade is actually a character of Marvel. It's the same with The Punisher, to be honest. I just thought it was a cool film. And then to go back to it now as a geek, as an adult, as a super nerd, and to be able to appreciate the nuances, the things that they did and they copied from the comic books and the way Wesley Snipes' performance and all that. So I've got a lot of memories of this movie, and I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to start this new series. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Let's start off with the synopsis. So this one comes from the wonderful people at IMDb. I'm sort of tempted, should I do this in my normal voice, or should I do like my Jason Statham sort of impression? You know, let's give it a go with the Jason Statham impression, you know, just for fun. Right. In a world where vampires walk the earth, Blade has a goal. His goal is to rid the world of all vampire evil. When Blade witnesses a vampire bite Dr. Karen Jensen, he fights away the beast and takes Jensen back to his hideout. Here, alongside Abraham Whistler, Blade attempts to help heal Jensen. The vampire Quinn, who was attacked by Blade, reports back to his master Deacon Frost, who is planning a huge surprise for the human population. I think I lost it halfway through. It started off strong, and then it kind of went a bit bad near the end, to be honest. My Jason Statham impression is only really good like for a first few sentences. Like I like taking the mick out of the fact of every Jason Statham movie is just him. It's basically the title is what he is. I'm the transporter. I'm the beekeeper. You know what I mean? I just find that funny. But anyway, he's not in this movie, so I'm not going to carry on. As for the cast, so of course you've got the absolutely legendary Wesley Snipes, as Blade. You've got Stephen Dorff as Deacon Frost, which I've never liked that name, Deacon Frost. It's such a terrible name, but then again, it's a very 90s sort of name as well. And again, I don't know, because again, I'll be honest, I love Blade, but I don't really read any Blade comics. He more so appears in other stories that I enjoy. So maybe Deacon Frost is from the comic books. I don't know. But I've just never liked that name, Deacon Frost. It's just the most 90s cheesy sort of villain name ever. But anyway, that's his name. Chris Christopherson, the legendary Chris Christopherson, as Whistler. Nibush Wright as Karen. Donal Logue as Quinn. Uno Kier as Dragonetti. Ali Jova as Mercury. And Tracy Lords as Raquel. So that is your cast. As for the production, so I've managed to find a lot about this movie and a lot about actually the character of Blade, you know, from like its first sort of being shown and sort of where it first began, as well as the development and casting. So yeah, this one's going to be a fun one. So the character Blade was created in 1973 for Marvel Comics by the writer Marv Wolfman and artist Gene Colan as a supporting character in the 1970s comic The Tomb of Dracula. The comic book Blade used teakwood knives and was much more the everyman in his behaviour and attitude. Though courageous and brave, he displayed flaws as well, such as an inability to get along with certain other supporting cast members and hatred of vampires that broadened on fanaticism. The character was not originally a daywalker, but a human being immune to being turned into a vampire. Lacking the superhuman speed and strength of his undead quarry, he relied solely on his wits and skill until he was bitten by the character Morbius, as seen in Peter Parker Spider-Man issue number 8, first published in August 1999. The film's portrayal of Blade was updated for a 1990s audience, and the comics character was sequentially modified to match. Goya replaced the dagger as Blade used in the comics with a sword and gave him a more samurai-like aesthetic. The film's version of Deacon Frost also differs greatly from his comic book counterpart, which again he was in the comics. He was older with white hair and a literal church deacon, but the film retains Frost's upstart ambitions. As for the development, when New World Pictures brought the rights to Marvel Comics, they were set to make a Mexico set Western starring Richard Roundtree as the vampire hunter. Marvel Studios then started the development to develop the film in early 1992, when rapper LL Cool J was interested in playing the lead role. That would have been a completely different movie, to be honest. Like, I love LL Cool J. Like, one of my favorite roles of his is actually in Deep Blue Sea, which, you know, I love that film. But yeah, that would have been a very different movie if it was LL Cool J. And to be honest, I think it would have been great with Richard Roundtree as well. You know, if you know his movies, especially Shaft, you know how brilliant he would have been. Anyway, where was I? Right. So the film was eventually set up at New Line Cinema with David S. Goya writing the script. When Goya heard a film was in development, he went to pitch with director Ernest Dixon. David Fincher was also attached to the project and even worked on the script with Goya. New Line Cinema originally wanted to do Blade as something that was almost a spoof before the writer convinced them otherwise. At one point, the studio even asked if Blade could be white. Goya wanted to take the characters seriously and ground them in a scene of reality with vampirism as a biological disease. He even pitched a trilogy of movies, almost Wagnerian in scope. He also wanted to demystify the vampires and treat them as serious villains with a greater sense of realism instead of the doomed romantic characters shown in Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. Goya's early drafts predated but took a similar postmodern approach as the films From Dusk Till Dawn and Vampire in Brooklyn. After failing to get a Black Panther film in production, in 1996, Wesley Snipes signed on to star as Blade. Snipes also produced through his company, Amen Ra Films, and worked with the writers to invest the story with elements of classic tragedy, like Lear, like Hamlet, to heighten the character's emotional drama. Blade had a $45 million budget. So that is a sort of bit of the development. As for casting, so when Goya first pitched the idea of doing a Blade film, Michael DeLuca, head of New Line Cinema, suggested Denzel Washington, Wesley Snipes, and Lawrence Fishburne, which would have all been brilliant, to be honest. A young Denzel Washington, a young Wesley Snipes, young Lawrence Fishburne, they all would have been fantastic, to be honest, in the role. But to Goya, Snipes was always the perfect choice for Blade, and I do agree, but I would have liked to see Denzel or Lawrence in that role. The finalised script was sent to Snipes, and no other actor was seriously considered. Patrick McGoohan was the first choice to play Whistler, as Stephen Norrington was a fan of The Prisoner from 1967. John Voight was also considered for the role. That's a bit of what I'm casting. As for filming, principal photography commenced on February the 5th, 1997 and concluded on June the 6th, 1997 and was in large part done in Los Angeles, with some scenes being shot in Death Valley. All sets were constructed and all on-set filming occurred in what was formerly the Redken Shampoo Factory in Canoga Park. The effects for the film were done by Flat Earth Productions. As for post-production, the film cut of the first cut of the film was 140 minutes long. It had a disastrous test screening with audiences, heavily edits, and reshoots were implemented, which delayed the release date for more than half a year. The most significant change was the addition of the final sword fight between Blade and Deacon Frost, which did not exist in the original cut. In the original ending, Frost turned into La Magra and became a large swirling mass of blood instead of keeping his form. I think that's actually, you can still find that on the DVD deleted scenes. I don't think they got rid of it completely. You can still find it. This was scrapped because the filmmakers could not get the special effects to look right. Yeah, I've seen them. They don't look good at all. Like, granted, it's the end of the 90s. CGI is still relatively newish. you know. So yeah, it makes sense. Like, they could do it now, but back then it wasn't something they could do, especially on their budget anyway. It can be seen as a special feature on the DVD. Stan Lee originally had a cameo that was ultimately cut from the film. He played one of the cops that came into the Blood Club during the aftermath and discovered Quinn's body on fire. That would have been brilliant, to be honest. Like, who doesn't love a Stan Lee cameo? It's a shame they couldn't get that done, because it would have like started emotional earlier of having sort of recurring Stan Lee cameos. I think actually the first Stan Lee cameo, I think, was actually in Mallrats in the Kevin Smith movie. I think, even though that's not Marvel, still, I think that's the first Stan Lee cameo in the movie, I think. Anyway, the scene where Karen and Deacon are talking about the cure for vampirism initially ran slightly longer and answered the question of how the vampires would feed if everybody was turned into a vampire. They would keep some humans alive in giant blood bags to harvest them. The bags can still be seen in a doorway during the scene, and later played an integral part of the plot in Blade Trinity. Marvel was not going to give Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan credit for the characters they had created, but Goya insisted. He asked New Line and they accepted, but representatives of Marv Wolfman said only he should get credit and not Gene Colan. Goya insisted they both be credited. So that is everything I can find for the development on this movie. Yeah, like Blade, it's an icon. The character's an icon, the movie's iconic, everything about it is just incredible. And one thing I forgot to mention, I'm currently sitting in the dark in my room, because I figured there's no way I could be like some common day walker, right? And watch this and talk about this movie in the light. The best way to talk about a movie like this, you've got to be in the dark. So the only light I have at the moment is from my screen. Apart from that, I am in complete blackness around me, and it is terrifying, but it really sets the mood of getting into watching Blade. But no, I am very much excited for this movie. So I'm going to go off, I'm going to go watch Blade, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about the story, first impressions, overall thoughts, production design, the bit of trivia, all that sort of stuff. And then when we come back, it's going to be absolutely brilliant. So I'll see you all in a second. And welcome back, everyone. So before we get into the Blade, and I talk about how brilliant the movie is and how it still stood the test of time, I do want to make a small apology for that introduction. I have 2 golden rules when I do this podcast, and these rules are not just for me. I recommend this for anybody who wants to do a podcast. Never record when you are ill, and never record when you are tired. I have done before many times, and the result has always been me very much like Nicolas Cage, very tired, very wide, very manic, very uncontrollable, very sort of a bit of a, I wouldn't say a loose cannon, but very much the fact of, I don't know where I'm going to go. And when I did the introduction to that, I'd been up all day since 6:30 in the morning. Again, did driving lesson, did loads of hours at work, and then did a little bit more research, and then did the introduction. And so by the time I did it, I was very, very tired. So I do apologize if I seemed a bit sort of strange or stranger than usual in that introduction. So I just wanted to apologize there. Anyway, moving on. Blade, as I said, first impressions going in. The movie's brilliant. It has stood the test of time. For a movie from 1998, it still works. And I think the reason why this movie still works is even though the CGI, is a bit magoo, and that hasn't aged very well, I think the reason why Blade itself is so good and why it has stood the test of time, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but bear with me, because it will make sense, especially for a movie with vampires. Trust me, this will make sense. The movie's grounded. Now you're probably thinking, Luke, how can a movie with vampires be grounded? And it's a good question. I'll explain. So the reason why I think this movie works, and because it's grounded, is because even though it has vampires in it, it's still it's still a very grounded sort of story in terms of, you have Blade, who, yes, he is a day walker, but he's a man on a mission. he has sort of a revenge tale, for the death of his mother and him being cursed with this vampire plague, that he is going to seek his revenge one vampire at a time to not only sort of regain some humanity in the world, but in himself, but also get one step closer to finding who bit and killed his mother. And then obviously you have Whistler as well. His family was killed in front of him by a vampire, so he has his vengeance. So it's a very grounded sort of story. And I love that. I do. And again, Wesley Snipes, let's be honest, he was the best casting for Blade. Like there's no disagreement there. There's no argument. Of all the people they wanted to have, Wesley Snipes was the best. He has martial arts training. So I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine when it comes to doing the stunts and doing the fight coordination, majority of the time I would imagine it's him, because it looks like him whenever he's fighting. You can see his face very clearly. And if it was a stunt double, those shots wouldn't be as clear on his face. So you can see that it's his Wesley Snipes doing the fighting. And I think it was in, not Total Recall, Demolition Man. I think Wesley Snipes actually did his own stunts as well in that, because again, he is trained in martial arts. So, it makes sense. It works. Again, this is ironic that I use Ryan Reynolds for this case, because he was in Blade Trinity and he was basically playing a prototype version of Deadpool and then went on to become Deadpool. But like Ryan Reynolds was born to play Deadpool, Wesley Snipes was born to play Blade. And it's as simple as that. You watch this movie, you're like, yeah, it is. And it's brilliant. It's good. Well, I think the only sort of downside I have, and it's not really a downside, it's me just nitpicking because how good the movie is. It's me just trying to find something just to nitpick at. Is that what I like about Blade 2 and Blade Trinity, even though a lot of people don't like the third movie, what I like about those movies is that they bring the humor into Blade. And again, this goes back into what I say about this movie. It's grounded, where it's like Blade he talks, but he doesn't talk very much. He's very stoic. He's a very sort of, he's mostly just, facial expressions. And that is how he is in this movie. Whereas in the other two, you get to see the humor side of him. So you get the horror, but you also get the action and you get the comedy as well. And it just shows that, Blade doesn't have to be serious. Where in this one, he's just plain sort of like serious all the way through. And I think that's why I probably enjoyed the second and third movie more, just because you get a bit more of his character, because he says more, he's more emotive than he is here. Like I said, he's more just stoic. But again, that's just a little thing that bothers me. But again, first impressions, apart from the CGI that looks janky, and I can understand why they changed the alternate sort of boss fight with Deacon Frost at the end, because that CGI, even if they tried their best to make it work, it was still very much the late 90s and CGI was still relatively newish. And it just didn't look good at all. And there were moments in the movie with the CGI that they had didn't look good. But again, this is what I mean, is the fact of, even though the CGI doesn't look good, because, and I keep saying this word, but because the movie's grounded, because the action's so good, because the music is there, that when you get those moments of, oh God, when he first stabs a vampire and they turn to ash, that's cool. It looks awesome. It looks wicked. But at the same time, she's like, oh, it's not so great. But you don't mind, because you're so sort of full of adrenaline of of the action, of the close quarters combat, going from corridor to corridor to corridor, seeing Wesley Snipes actually kicking people's asses and actually doing the fighting on screen. It's not some stuntman or whatever. It's actually Wesley Snipes actually doing it all. You can't have not sit and go, that's awesome. That's brilliant. That's I don't care that the CGI is a bit hokey. It looks good. Like where the movie begins, where you got that young guy and you haven't seen Blade, and you come in, and the guy's in a rave and he tries to sort of flirt with this one girl, and they push him away, and all of a sudden he's freaking out, like, what am I doing here, man? Like, oh, I shouldn't be here. And all of a sudden the blood rain comes down, the techno music comes in, and it's like doom 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 blood rain. Like, that's not the tune, but I don't really know it off the top of my head, but you know what I mean. The blood starts coming down, and the guy's freaking about, and it's terrifying. That could be the beginning of a horror movie. You know what I mean? That scene. And then all of a sudden, the guy's on the floor covered in blood. They're all over him. Like, again, he realizes that he's a hen in a wolf's den. Really, like, he's screwed. And all of a sudden, he goes down, and you just see the boots, and he looks up, and there's Blade, and all of them just know who he is. The Daywalker, Blade's here, and some of them try to run, some of them try to fight. Doesn't matter. While the blood's still drenched in blood everywhere, and the music's still going, he's just kicking ass and wrecking face. And it's brilliant. It's epic, and it's one of those where it's like, yeah, again, CGI not great, but you know what? That scene was epic, and it's just one thing. It's like scene after scene after scene after scene of moments like that where you're like, epic, 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 brilliant, great fighting, love it, music, everything, fight. So I don't know. It's just one of those where I was watching this movie on Now TV, and on Now TV they give you the Rotten Tomatoes rating. And again, I've said this many times before on the podcast: never listen to Rotten Tomatoes. Because they in my opinion, they never really gauge on how good a movie actually is. And I always say to people, always listen to your own thoughts and feelings on a film. Go watch it yourself. If you're interested and you're curious enough, watch it yourself, get your own opinions, because Rotten Tomatoes, as Sean from Review It Yourself, when he did his series of Did You Even Fucking Watch It, which is my favorite segment of his show, where they look into Rotten Tomatoes and they read the top comments from top critics, and a lot of the time you read what the critics say and you sit there and go, did you even watch the movie? Do you even like cinema? You know what I mean? So I never take it for granted, but it always gets me that I saw that and I think it was like 59%, and I thought to myself, how, when, why, what, no, how? You know what I mean? Like, this movie isn't bad. It isn't terrible. Like I said, the only thing that for me personally that lets it down is the CGI. And yes, you could probably go as far as to say that Stephen Dorff as Deacon Frost is not a very good villain, to be honest. And there are small moments here and there where I can say, oh, like Stephen Dorff was like, oh, he was good, but then other moments I'm like, no, you know what I mean? So yeah, if you wanted to, you could easily do little moments where like, this wasn't good, this was good, but even those parts, and like I said, for me personally, I'm nitpicking here, but even those parts that you get together, you still wouldn't make a bad movie. You know what I mean? And this wasn't. So again, I question it, but everybody was good. So I Donald Lowe as Quinn, brilliant. I love the whole thing where like Blades chopped his hands off, burnt him. There's different ways he's tried to kill him, and Quinn keeps coming back. And I love it. Every time he takes one hand off, grows another hand, takes the other hand, sets him on fire, gets his face, puts up against the moving train, so he's got his one half of his face is like shredded to like mincemeat. He skewers him. Two metal sort of silver stakes in both arms, like almost semi-crucifies him up against the wall. It's like he gets like a wire, cuts him in two, sort of thing. Brilliant. Like, I love that. I love that running sort of gag, that sort of joke that I love. Again, Whistler by Chris Christopherson, legendary sort of, I was going to say guitar player, but he isn't. He's a legendary American country singer. Musician was probably the best word I'm looking for. It actually kind of made me laugh because as I was watching this and I saw Chris Christopherson, it kind of, funny enough, it reminded me of the thought I had of like, why is it that Blade not only has a very southern sort of mentor, but you also get the same thing in Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage, where he meets the previous Ghost Rider, who is played by he plays Wade Garrett in Roadhouse. Oh, Sam Elliott. Is Sam Elliott? Yes, I think it's Sam Elliott. I think. Anyway, he meets him, and it's maybe kind of funny. He was like, oh, these movies weren't that so far apart from each other, but both have very southern, westerny sort of mentors, which, again, don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but I like it. It was this little thing that I noticed. But yeah, I'm still in first impressions. I just don't get how this movie was considered not great by critics, because obviously people still love it. People still talk about it. It's, tell you the honest truth, this movie is the Blade film that you get heard the most in the podcasting world. You don't see many people talk about Blade 2. Hardly anybody talks about Blade Trinity, because I don't think anybody really likes Blade Trilogy, whatever, apart from myself, even though I can't pronounce it, obviously. But people always talk about Blade 1. And the reason is because it's good. And like I said in the introduction, this was the movie that, put Marvel on the map. If it wasn't for Blade, you wouldn't have got X-Men. You wouldn't have got Fantastic Four. You probably wouldn't have got Spider-Man. Sony probably wouldn't have bothered to do with Spider-Man. There's potentiality, you know. This movie really set the template of what was to become Marvel, what would eventually become the MCU, what would become Iron Man and Hulk and the Incredible Hulk and Thor and Captain America. So, you know, us as sort of superhero fans, us as superhero movie fans, owe a lot to Wesley Snipes and to Blade. If it wasn't for this movie, who knows where we would be today? If superhero movies would be as dominant as they are, you know, there's a whole potentiality they could have easily poof in the wind. You know, came and went. You know, it was like a fart in the wind. Just here one day, gone the next. But because how good this movie is and how much it was loved by fans and it made its money back, that Marvel was like, oh, we will do more of these. And then we got X-Men in 2000, 2 years later, you know, and then we got Daredevil. And I know people don't like Daredevil, but, you know, we had that movie and we had the Hulk, which I love Ang Lee's Hulk. I've got the special edition. One day I'll probably do it on TikTok, but I'll show people that special edition. It's a brilliant special edition, one of my favorites I own. You know, like I said, we got all those other movies. So yeah, we owe this movie a lot. But that, again, like I said, I'm still on first impressions. I haven't even got around to the story yet because I'm just so gushy about how good this movie is. And if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't be where we are. And I wouldn't be possibly doing this series today, you know, because there wouldn't be enough to talk about. But anyway, that's first impressions. As you can tell, I love it. I want to talk a bit about the story. For anybody that doesn't know, obviously, the story of Blade, Blade obviously is the Daywalker, and as I mentioned, he is on a sort of revenge to kind of kill all of the vampires for not only giving him this sort of curse, but also trying to get revenge for his mother. And he works with Whistler, who again is trying to get his revenge. And like I mentioned, you know, you have the epic scene where they're in the club and they're fighting. And you get the blood rain, brilliant. I kind of wish the rain would kept going while he was fighting. That would have been incredibly cinematic. As you go through it, you know, you meet Deacon Frost, who is basically a spoilt rich kid vampire who is just a douche. You just don't like him. Like, so there's certain moments where Stephen Dorff has cool moments, but there's other moments where you're like, you know what I mean? Like, that wasn't good, to be honest. But again, you look over it because Wesley Snipes is just so good in the role. And you know, like there's certain moments where you get to see more about like the vampires and the Vampire Council, with Udo Kier and him playing Dragonetti. Brilliant. You get to see all the other vampires. You learn about purebloods and non-pure bloods. So again, somebody who loves lore is brilliant for that. I love the bit with the giant fat vampire. I've even when I was younger, I questioned it, and I question it now. How is it that giant sort of vampire got to that size? Because like vampires regenerate, don't they? So I would imagine their metabolism is incredibly quick. That's why they need blood so much, because they lack iron in their blood. So they need to drink. But that's how vampires work normally. It's the fact of they have an iron deficiency, so they need the iron to keep living. So I would imagine if their metabolism works so quickly and they're hungry all the time, and they've got to keep stocking up on the iron. How is it that vampire, Peaches, I think his name is, Pearl, sorry, not Peaches, but even though Peaches would have matched him anyway. But like, how did he get so fat? You know what I mean? You know, as far as I'm aware, they don't eat meat; they just drink the blood. So was he already that fat, and then he got turned? It doesn't really matter. It's semantics. It's just one of those things. It's just an epic moment where you just like he's sitting there, he's like, "Oh, Blade, hi," Frost, you owe me, Frost, you owe me. No, Blade, no. And then Blade's like, what's that? And he's like, oh, no, nothing. Oh, it's a video game, nothing. And then they get the UV light and he's like, no. And Blade's kind of looking at him, he was like, well, you know, you wouldn't mind if I take it, you know, what is it? And he goes, oh, you know, it's the 12, it's all sacred of Lagvamata, you know, a blood god, you know. And he starts speaking like Vampanese. And Blake goes, well, you won't mind if I take it then. Takes it. He's off. The guy's like half barbecued, like he's half sort of pizzaed. And he says, Blade says to Karen, he basically says to her, like, if he moves, kill him. And she just kind of looks at him and she just like barbecues. I just find that funny. What would have been great if she had done it so much and just left it on and he exploded like a big sort of like fat and blood sort You know what I mean? That would have been great, but maybe it just wasn't in the budget. But I love how Wesley Snipes comes over and he kind of looks at her and goes, kind of gives that look, and she's like, "What? He moved." And there's little moments like that. Like I said, they're not there completely. There are comedic moments, but they're few and far between for me. I again, coming off Blade 2 and 3, I just wish there was a bit more. Like, one of my favorites is not even a moment where he's properly fighting. He's in the hospital. He saves Karen after she's been bitten. They're chasing after Quinn, and he goes to pick up the girl, and then the guard comes in, shoots him, and he just kind of looks at him, looks down at his chest where like he's wearing like the armor where the bullets have like bounced off. Looks at the guy and goes, "Motherfucker," or he's like, "What the fuck," something like that. And it's just funny because it's a funny sort of reaction. And like, there's another one as well where like Blade is fighting Deacon Frost at the end of the movie, and he chops it in half. And a Blade sort of there standing cool, being like, "Yeah, I just cut that motherfucker in half." And then he turns around, and then he doesn't say nothing, but he mouths. He goes, "What the fuck?" sort of thing. And again, even though he doesn't say anything, you can read his mouth and you can just hear his voice in your head, like that very sort of like, "What the fuck?" sort of thing. And it's brilliant. It is. But yeah, I don't really have much to say on the actual movie itself, on the actual story, because for me, I like this movie for the action. I like it for like I said, Wesley Snipes kicking ass, getting into it, being a badass. That's what I like about it. So I'm going to talk about sort of alternate endings and alternate bosses. So originally, there was a plan to have a different ending than what we got, and I will put my 2 pence and say here that the ending that we got is actually far superior to the original ending, for many reasons, to be honest, and I'll go into that in a minute. And there's also a alternate ending that was potentially going to set up Morbius, but we'll get onto that in a minute. So the alternate sort of fight scene. So the original plans for the fight scene were there was going to be a giant sort of blood monster, and it's a great idea, but it out of concepts and in practicality, it doesn't work. And again, I'm going to use this word again. The reason why this movie works is because it's grounded, and as soon as you start bringing in giant sort of blood monsters, it goes from being a grounded sort of character. You know, it very sort of goes from street to street, kind of like Batman, street to street sort of savior who kind of kills vampires sort of thing, saves people from vampires, that sort of thing. When you've got somebody like that, and it's very boots on the ground, very sort of friendly neighborhood sort of Spider-Man sort of esque sort of thing. When you start bringing sort of blood magic and that sort of thing, it gets a bit so high fantasy where it's like it doesn't fit, it doesn't work. You can't go for a whole almost, because this movie is almost 2 hours long. You can't go for a whole sort of hour and 30 minutes of just being very grounded, and also at the very end, a giant blood monster. It just doesn't work. And then when you have like a really douchey character like Deacon Frost, who is the blood monster, it's like, it just doesn't work, in my opinion. Anyway, and then when you actually watch it, the footage is on YouTube. I recommend to go give it a watch. When you watch the footage as well, it's the CGI is terrible, and I think that's why they didn't go with it in the end, is because the CGI didn't work. Maybe if they tried to do it now, potentiality, like they could have made it work and it would look fantastic. But still, what works for Blade is because it's grounded. When you start taking it out of the grounded context and you start putting that blood sort of god stuff in with that dodgy CGI, it doesn't work. So I'm glad they took it out, to be honest. It is kind of cool how he defeats him. Blade defeats him kind of the same way. He gets the serum, and the Deacon has made like this like blood tornado now, and Blade breaks the serum. That kind of I think it explodes the hemoglobin, so that makes the vampires explode. Gets that, breaks it. That little liquid goes into this whirlwind, and then the blood blows up, and then Deacon's on the floor, and then Blade just kind of stabs him in the chest, and he dies. Whereas the alternate one, the one that we get actually in the original sort of in the final cut sort of the movie that went into cinemas, is it's hand-to-hand combat. You know, they're using swords. It's epic. It's cool. And like I said, you get that moment where he slices them in half, and you actually can see it doesn't work because he chops his hand off. His hand regrows out of blood. Chops it in half. His body goes, his torso goes up in the air. His legs on the ground, and he's attached by this like giant blood sort of tentacle that pulls him back down. And that's why, you know, Blade turns around and goes like, "What?" He mouths like, "What the fuck?" Because it doesn't, like, that shouldn't have happened. He should have killed him. And again, when he gets around to actually fighting, and Blade's trying to take him, and like Deacon Frost is too quick, and he's he's beating him up. Blade jumps up, gets the serum, like stabs him with it. And he's looking, he's getting all bloated because obviously he thinks it's serum for Blade. He doesn't realize what it is. And there's a really cool moment where he throws one in the air, and as it comes down, he just sort of roundhouse kicks it and darts it straight into Deke's head. And then he explodes. He gets all really, really big and blotchy, and then he explodes and he dies. And that is pretty epic. Yeah, the CGI is not brilliant, but because you have the hand-to-hand combat, it still keeps it very grounded, still keeps it very sort of realistic, very sort of, what we've come to see in this movie so far. And then you get the big explosion. Okay, he's dead. He's done with. There you go. And then they climb out of the tunnel, and Karen says to Blade, of like, I can cure you. And then Blade goes, no, keep your cure. The war's just begun. And then the movie kind of cuts, and they're in Russia. And then for someone, we don't actually know why he's in Russia. For some reason, he's just in Russia. And then this vampire's attacking this lady, and Blade's like, I can't do Russian. I can do a Russian accent, but I can't do speak Russian. But he basically goes, comrade, and he doesn't. Well, obviously Wesley Snipes, Blade doesn't say it in a Russian accent, but he basically calls him comrade. Gets his attention, and the vampire runs up, and then he just pulls his knife out, and then it ends. Whereas the alternate ending was after Karen basically said to him, give him a serum, and Blade goes, no, keep your serum. There's a war going on. Karen basically goes, I think your watches have started, or something along those lines. And Blade turns around, and there's a guy on the roof, and you can't really see you can see his eyes and his head, but you can't really see his mouth. It's covered, and he's got his big trench coat on. And then it ends, right? Now, from what I've seen online, people are saying this is Morbius, that it was hinted that it was meant to be Morbius, that the movie was setting up Morbius, the sort of living vampire, and that potentiality that they were going to have Morbius in the second Blade, and that apparently Del Toro wanted to have Morbius in the movie, but I didn't go so far into the research to find out why he wasn't. Again, I'm sure we'll find out when I look into Blade 2. But that was the original plan, was to set up for Morbius, which is kind of funny, really, to think, because in sort of the comic books, Blade and Morbius have worked together in the comic books, and depends on which version of Morbius if they're going to go with. Are they going to go with sort of the Morbius that we got in the sort of Morbius movie? Would he have been that sort of guy where he's kind of like an anti-hero sort of thing, kind of like Venom is when he's with Eddie Brock, where he's like the lethal protector, where like, he is a hero, but he doesn't like Batman or Spider-Man will like beat the villain up, but will always make sure the villain gets arrested. Whereas like Venom and that, they'll beat the villain up, but they'll beat them up and kill them, or Morbius's case, he'll drain their blood and kill them. So it's one of those where it's like, which version were they going to do? Or were they going to have a version where like Morbius is basically like Dracula? He's the bad guy. I don't know. But it's interesting. But part of me, even though it makes no sense, I kind of like the sort of Moscow sort of feel to it, because it makes it feel a lot more sort of worldy, where it's not just centered to New York. It's not just centered to America. Like there's not just vampires in America. There's vampires everywhere. And for Blade going to Red Square in Moscow and killing a vampire there, it goes to show we don't know why he's there, but there's a vampire there, so he's there. He's wherever vampires are, he is there, and I love that. And yeah, it's a better ending, but it would have been cool if we had got Morbius. It would have been interesting to see what a 2000s Morbius would have been like and who they would have got to play him. But yeah, who knows? And yeah, coming to overall thoughts, I do like this movie. I really, really do. And even though I'm very positive on it, and I like it because, again, I use that word grounded, part of me, as I was watching it, part of me couldn't sit there and go, I just really like Blade 2. I really like Blade Trinity. And I know people are going to give me hate for that because people don't like Blade Trinity at all. And I understand why, but I just like those two movies. So I couldn't help not sit there and go, well, oh God, I just miss the way that sort of Blade and Wesley Snipes is in Blade 2. The way that he comes out of his shell a lot more, where he's making jokes and he's being cocky, but he's also being funny, and he's dangerous, and they're all scared of him, and they are terrified of the Daywalker. you know. And yeah, so even though I love this movie and I really do, for me, I just prefer Blade 2. Blade 2, we'll get to there when we get there, but the way what Del Toro was able to do with that film, I just love. And one thing I do want to mention as well is that you will find this if you end up watching all of the Blade movies, 1, 2, and 3, you will see that each one of them is different, is unique in its own way. Whereas like 1 is very grounded, 2 is very sort of like horror, comic booky sort of thing, and then 3 is kind of like very high. Well, I was going to say high fantasy, but more so high vampiric sort of thing when it brings in Dracula and all that, and it's very gruesome. But again, we will get there when we get there. So yeah, before I get into trivia, before I wrap things up, one thing I haven't done so far in the podcast for this year, for this season, and I wanted to bring it back specifically for this movie, was that I posted on Twitter that I was watching Blade, and that if anybody had any thoughts and feelings to kind of comment on. And I posted it on my Instagram, I posted it there on Twitter, I posted it everywhere. And I thought I was going to get loads of responses. I didn't get as many as I thought I would. But if you do want to get mentioned on the podcast, please do follow me on my socials, because when I do post things like that, I will shout you out, as I'm about to do now. So I had one comment on Twitter by the Horrifying History podcast, and it was not just a comment, it was a whole sort of discussion that we had. I won't read the full discussion. I'll mostly just read his parts. But they start with saying, I feel the original Blade was the best. Second was meh, but the third Blade was pretty good. I think the first set the bar, then it was a jump the shark film, which I'm guessing he means for the second film, and then on the third, it seems like they tried to go back to the original formula, but didn't quite make it there. Denai says, see, I'm conflicted because I love them all. I think I watched the third movie more than most out of all the films. That's probably why I like it. Then they reply, I love that the first one was so different for the time and still is a solid movie today. The second I liked, but it wasn't as good as the first one. I did enjoy the vampire Pomeranian, though, in the last film, and it also had Ryan Reynolds in it, which took it to a whole new level. And then we just started talking about how good Ryan Reynolds is and that he fixes everything that he's in. And he agreed with me, because that is very true. Ryan Reynolds in any film makes things better. I'm sure there are people out there who will disagree with us there. I'm one of these people that does actually like Green Lantern, and I know I'm going to get hate for it, but I don't care because I do like that movie. I've actually never watched the extended cut version of it, so maybe I will when I get round to it. But I do generally like the Green Lantern movie, even though, yes, the suit was animated, and that did bother me then, and it bothers me now, but it is just the way it is. Then Neil from the We Need Rose podcast, he commented, and to be honest, he had the best comment. He's the one that made me laugh. He basically goes, pretty much what Wesley Snipes said in Deadpool versus Wolverine. And for anybody who hasn't watched Deadpool and Wolverine, basically what Blade says in Deadpool and Wolverine is basically, there's only can I see if I can do my best Blade? There's only ever going to be one Blade, you know. And he's true. And he's exactly right. Wesley Snipes is the only Blade and will be the only Blade, to be honest. And I've got a little bit to say on that, actually, in a minute. I've just reminded myself, so we'll get there when we get there. So that was from Neil. And then I got one comment from somebody from TikTok, from S Productions. They basically said, unbelievable film. Wesley Snipes was the perfect casting. And I completely agree with you there. So thank you for everybody who gave me their comments and brought them in. One thing I do want to mention, as I said, I've just reminded myself, while watching this movie, I had a thought. And the thought was very simple, but also very sort of on point. Because as I was watching this movie, I kept thinking to myself, how is it that Marvel haven't been able to do a Blade movie? You know, because they announced, they did a whole stage performance talking about their slate, and he goes, oh, one more thing. And then Kevin Feige brought out Mahershala Ali, who is a brilliant actor. Like, he is fantastic. He is like he is the person that if you wanted another Blade, and you couldn't have Wesley Snipes, he would be the next person you go to, right? Okay, so perfect casting. I was hyped. I was like, oh my God, it's happening. We're getting Blade, right? And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think of how it's going to work or fit in. I just was like, oh my God, they've announced it, Blade. They've obviously got a plan. That was years ago. That was years ago. That was that long ago. All the movies that was announced during when Blade was brought out on stage, all those movies have either come out or have been cancelled. All the movies or the TV shows have been made. Blade hasn't. And it's as I watch this movie, I'm sitting there going, how is it that back in the 90s they were able to make a grounded, brilliant, really good Blade movie, but they can't do it now, in the 2020s, or not even that, in the 2010s when it was announced, and now we're in the 2020s. And they still haven't got an idea. And Mahershala Ali, I love him, but the man isn't getting any younger. And the problem is, when he's been playing Blade, he's meant to be a vampire that doesn't age. Like, he does age slowly, but you know what I mean? Like, he's meant to look young, and he was young, and he looked young when he was announced, and he still looks young now. But the problem is, when he does get around to playing Blade, they're gonna want him around for a long time. And the problem is, I think he's in his late 40s, 50s now. So potentially 50s, 60s, when they're done with him. And I know what you're saying. Oh, yeah, but they've got Hugh Jackman to play a Wolverine, and he looks older. No, yeah, I agree. But the thing is that, Hugh Jackman has been playing Wolverine since 2000. He's been Wolverine for a very, very long time. But Mahershala Ali, this would be his first time playing Blade, which means that you kind of want somebody young so that you can have them for longer, so you won't notice that they've aged. If you see what I mean, in continuity wise, it would make sense as to why he looks older and older and older. They could wive it away story wise, but again, it's that thing of how can they figure it out, And I was trying to think of it, and I thought to myself, I think the best way to do it is the fact of one of the issues they have with trying to bring Blade into the MCU is explaining the whole thing of like, hold on a second. If you're telling me that Blade's always existed in the MCU as we know, in sort of the sacred timeline, in the sort of one that we've got currently, how is it that vampires existed but we've never actually seen them? Now you could argue it because Blade's there, which is fine, but it's that difficult part of like, how do you do a vampire movie in the MCU at the moment? I don't know how it would work. My thought was two things. You could do an Elseworld story, which it's set like Fantastic Four. It's set in another world on an alternate Earth. Set it during like the 1920s, during the Roaring '20s, and have a Blade movie like that. And then you're not stuck to being sort of what you can do, what you can say. It can be an Elseworld story. It can be hard R. It can be rated, R-rated, be bloody, be gory, have swearing in it. Even though it's still part of the Marvel universe, like Deadpool, it's still its own little thing. You know what I mean? So it's a period piece. You haven't got to worry about continuity. You've got Blade during the 1920s. He can still use silver, stakes, swords and guns. He can still use all of them. But, you can ground him if you want, or you cannot ground him, but it doesn't matter because you're free in this new universe to do anything. You're not sort of stuck by limitations of lore or canon or anything like that, that's already been set up in prior Marvel movies up until that point. And like that was my thought, but for some reason they're just not figuring it out. And it made me laugh when I watched Deadpool and Wolverine, where Wesley Snipes basically goes, "There's only ever going to be one Blade," and he's right. There will be. At this point, I don't think Mahershala Ali is going to hang around anymore. And it's kind of funny that we actually technically, if you think about it, if you know your Marvel lore, we actually have had Mahershala Ali as Blade twice already in the MCU. First time, you didn't see him, but you heard his voice in an end credit scene in Eternals. Most people probably wouldn't have seen it because most people don't like Eternals, which is a shame because Eternals is a brilliant movie. It should have been shorter and it should have been a TV series first, but we won't get into it. but I don't know when I'll get the chance to talk about superheroes, so I'm getting really nerdy here. So he at the end credits he was talking to Kit Harington, who basically would have become. I don't think he will be anymore, but the original plan that he was going to become the Black Knight, who is a character in Marvel, and he's looking at a sword in an office, and there's a voice behind him that says something under the lines of, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" or something like that. And it's Mahershala Ali's voice, and that was going to be Blade, and then that was going to eventually set up to bring in Blade in. So there was that, and then there was a Disney Plus show called Marvel Zombies, and Mahershala Ali was in it, but he didn't talk. So basically, it was Blade, but he wasn't Blade. He was playing a version of Moon Knight, right? And what I find really funny and ironic is the fact of we have seen and heard Mahershala Ali, but we haven't had both at the same time. So we have so digitally in Marvel Zombies, even though he's playing Moon Knight, it looks like Mahershala Ali. He just doesn't say anything. He doesn't talk, right? Whereas we heard his voice in the end credit scene. So obviously they want him, but for some reason they just haven't been able to get his face and his voice together on screen. But it's really strange. Why use his likeness but not have him speak? But why have him speak but not see him in the end credits? It's so annoying. It really is. It's the fact of like we are so close to having greatness, have a brilliant character like Blade, played by Mahershala Ali, in the MCU, and they could do an Elseworld story, and if they did, it wouldn't matter what they did because it was in another world, another universe, and they just haven't done it, and they haven't figured it out, and it just says to me that they were just so happy to get Mahershala Ali signed on as Blade that they didn't have a plan. They didn't have an idea, didn't have a script. It was literally the fact of, we got Mahershala Ali as Blade. We've got to tell people. We've got to get the hype. They didn't need to, because they still had I think Infinity War and Endgame and all these other things, before that movie comes out. So fans were still hype. It was still during sort of the greatness era of Marvel. You know what I mean? So they didn't have to do that, but they did, and it was brilliant. It was like, oh my God, and then nothing's happened. And it's so disappointing. So yeah, watching this movie, you sit there and go, yeah, no, Wesley Snipes is Blade, and he will always be Blade. Kind of like Hugh Jackman will always be Wolverine. It's just the way it is. And I'm fine with that, to be honest. It would have been nice to have a Mahershala Ali. It really, really would have. But if we don't, we don't, because Marvel basically fumbled it. And it's a real shame. Anyway, that was just my sort of 2 pence that I wanted to throw in there, because I don't know when I'm ever going to be able to throw that in. Onto some trivia that I found about this movie. So, first bit of trivia I found was when David S. Goyer first pitched the idea of doing a Blade movie, the executives of New Line felt there was only 3 actors who could play it, which was like Wesley Snipes, Denzel Washington, and Lawrence Fishburne. But Goyer's mind, Snipes was always the perfect choice for the character of Blade. The scene where Quinn, Donald Logue, attacks Karen in the hospital corridor features lots of screaming, but they knew something was wrong when Lowell started yelling too. During the tussle, he fell face first onto the hard floor and completely dislodged his jaw. Jesus Christ. Didn't know. Oh, wow. He had broken it in an accident years prior, and opening his mouth too wide and too fast can unhinge it. They were filming in an abandoned hospital, but had to rush to a real one. And he says, quote, "But I've got this guy who's dressed as a third-degree burns victim, essentially naked, running in with his jaw hanging down. The room cleared out pretty fast." I imagine it would do, because they wouldn't have had the time to kind of special effects him. He would have had to go in like that. God, that must have sucked. I don't know. I'm guessing reading that they probably kept his screams, kept the sound and used it, because I didn't notice that, but maybe they did. That's cool if they did, but also wow, that sounds really painful. A deleted conversation from the script explained how Blade's sword originally belonged to Whistler, who himself was part of a long line of vampire hunters. Quinn originally had a much smaller role, but Donald Logue was so funny on set that his character was expanded and he was allowed to ad-lib a good portion of his dialogue, which I can probably imagine. It does feel like ad-libbing at times, but it doesn't matter because his character is brilliant, to be honest. Actually, some people might disagree with me with this, but I would have preferred Quinn to have been the villain than Deacon Frost, but again, that's just me. And finally, so Chris Christopherson's character, Whistler, was created for Blade's cameo on Spider-Man in 1994. He was liked so much by Marvel CEO that he was adopted into the Marvel universe. And that Spider-Man would have been the Spider-Man TV series, where I think that was that was my first introduction to Blade. That was my first introduction to Morbius as well, to be honest. Watching the reruns of the TV series of Spider-Man, I remember Spider-Man's movie came out with Sam Raimi, and then I remember watching the sort of re-shows of Spider-Man TV shows, and oh my god, Venom, Anti-Venom, Craven, Scorpion, and just fall in love with Spider-Man. But again, we will get to Spider-Man, but I just thought that was cool. Anyway, that is all my trivia. I do apologize if this episode has been a bit weird and rambly, to be honest. Like, this is the thing, when you get me talking about superheroes, I get very easily distracted and off topic, because it's not a topic that I talk about a lot, and it's not a topic that I've actually managed to talk about at all on the podcast, really. So it's always a pleasure to be able to sort of talk about superheroes. So I'm glad I started with Blade. The next one is going to be X-Men from the year 2000. And I'm just so pumped for that one because, like I said, Blade is what started it all, but what really launch pad everything was X-Men. X-Men coming out and being so successful and doing so well. People were like, Blade did really, really well. X-Men did really, really well. Come on, let's do more. And then that went off to what we got next. So yeah, can't wait for that one. Really excited. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you managed to kind of sort of worm your way through my waffliness and enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, please do leave me a like and subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you follow me on Spotify. I'm currently at 149 followers, so I only need one more to get me to 150. So if you could do that for me, I'll be eternally grateful. Again, rate the podcast if you haven't. Leave feedback and comments down below on Spotify. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on TikTok at the Howdy Beans podcast. And yeah, I think that's everything. So as always, I've been your host, Luke the Howdy Bean. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure talking about Blade with you today. And I'll see you all very soon for the next one. Bye-bye.